he had me come out and see him, and we drove around, and he said, you know, Jim, I can't trust anybody. I want you to take over my life. It was that cold turkey, you know. And I had to think about that. Thinking back, I think it was about 2 weeks. And later, I went saw Salito and saw him and saw the situation. And I said, okay, I will. And that wasn't something I was particularly apt at doing, running his business life, which was a mess. Again, we got about 30 lawsuits, unpaid bill, like a madness. And I had to set up an office, find everything, try to get it organized, get the lawyers going and so forth. And private investigators, because he was being conned by people. They had surveillance systems. The paranoia was extraordinary. In the middle of it, I'll tell you this, I leveled with him. I got him alone, and I said, you know, you got to stop this, Sam, and so forth. And I gave him a half-an-hour lecture, and he listened. The first time he would ever listen in this period, and he listened. Then he said, right, okay. Then he says, come with me, and he took me in the bathroom. He flushed the toilet, turned on the shower, turned on all the faucets to bury the sound, and told me there are people after me, you know. Paranoia was, I was laughing. I couldn't laugh, but he played it straight and so forth. And somehow we still communicate, but eventually it got bad, and I had to quit. And he, at that point, had moved to Livingston. And we were still in communication, but I wasn't working anymore. But I called him up and asked to speak to Sam at the Livingston Motor Lodge, Motor Hotel. And the lady on the phone said, can't bring him to the phone because they're wheeling him out right now. And he'd had a heart attack in the room. Fortunately, there were 5 nurses having their convention, 5 in the hotel. And the operator had gone and got them. They ran up there, and they really saved his life. And I flew up the next day, I remember, because it was my birthday. And I walked in that little hospital. And as I walked in, I could see through the door. It's a very tiny little place, you know. You can go right in the front door, and you're right there in the few operating rooms. And he's shouting at this guy, I'm dying. You know, and he's cursing him like crazy. And all these buzzers went off. I just arrived. I'm looking through a crack in the door, and doctors comes one out of surgery and run in here, and sure enough, they had put a pacemaker in, and it didn't work. So they saved his life. They got another pacemaker. I had 2. And when he woke up, he says, I told you, you son of a bitch. To the doctor, who he became incredible great friends with. There was a wonderful doctors up there. Guys escaping the system that happened to be really bright. But nobody knew just how bad Sam... I didn't know anything about drugs. I know he's on the cocaine and he's taking Quaaludes. And I'm trying to find out from other parties who were the people that supplied him with these things, who called themselves friends, how much he was on, because the doctor was giving him a quarter of Quaalude for the heart. And I'm trying to tell the doctor, I said, I don't think it's going to help. And I finally convinced him, and we went over to the apartment, and there were more drugs in his apartment than there were in the hospital. You know, it was incredible. But they finally got it stabilized, and when I was allowed to see him, he said, you know, there was another couple there, these so-called friends, and he tried to get them to get him Coke, you know, go get me something. And he just said, fucking Silk, he won't get me anything. A son of a bitch is no good. And I just sat there. And finally, he got him out. And I walked over to the bed, and he just started to bawl and gave me a hug. Twice, I think, he cried in my arms, but that was it. He was, even in that insane state, he knew what the bottom line was and what counted. And he came out of it then, and we wrote something on the rocks about Alcatraz. A lady in San Francisco was the producer and so forth. And he'd done a draft of it, and he had me, because one of the principal characters was named Silk. And I kind of used son of a bitch, you know. Well, I went home. I didn't promise him. I read it, and okay. And I realized what we're doing is we're going back to where we were, you know, 25 years earlier. And writing the same 2 characters, only now one of them's me and the other one's him. And I said, yeah, okay. So I drove out back to the trailer, and I think we're going to go to work. He says, let's go. And we took out everything, and we drove to Point Doom Market. And he says, I'll get the meat. And I said, okay, I'll get the peanut butter and the coffee and the white bread. And we argued over the ice cream. And this is stuff we had done 1,000 times, 20 years earlier or more. And we never mentioned it. We just did it. Went back, and I made the coffee, and then we sat down, and he lay down, and I sat down, and we worked on the script for an hour. And then I left, and while I was gone, my wife called, because my daughter had had a grandchild, first grandchild. And he talked to Lynn for about 45 minutes about yesterday, and we were going to go face our demons again and see if we could handle them. But I never saw him again. That was it. He went to Bago in Mexico and had a heart attack and came home, and he was gone.
When Sam died, they had this great gathering of a lot of people who used to work with him that had not a funeral, but a sort of a ceremony for him, you know. And all these old guys like Jason Robards and Luke Askew got up there and said, well, this is just like a Peckinpah movie. Everybody's late and nobody knows what the fuck's going on. Lee Marvin got up there and said, there's a statue in London for the RAF heroes of the Second World War. All it says is, I fought the battle, I stayed the course, I kept the faith. He walks off the stage. Jason Robards gets up and does a bunch of Shakespeare, you know. And I wrote this song. The bastards could muster. From Danny the dildo to Sidney the snake, and I feel like a working girl pausing to wonder just how much screwing the spirit can take. I said, Willie, old buddy, please tell me again the reason to keep going on. He said, there's no harder words to say over a friend. They've done you so righteously wrong. They stopped you from singing your song.
Anymore? They had a ceremony. I didn't go. I couldn't go. All the friends got together, but I couldn't go. Tough times. I get him now in the comic strip.
If he was back here now, what would you say to him?
I'd tell him to shut up, that I'm coming.
I said, Willie, old buddy, please tell me again the reason to keep going on. He said, there's no harder words to say over a friend, and they've done you so righteously wrong. They stopped you from singing your song.
He couldn't really live until he was in front of that camera. I mean, he was lost in life, as far as we all are, really, in a sense. But he had such an insecurity, and nobody would think that he would put such the disappearance of the macho man and individuality like it did in the Wild Bunch. And to me, I don't think many people say that, but I knew him very well, and I think it was just such a great insecurity and unworthiness to measure up to something that had already been set by noble men.
I miss his presence. I miss that enigmatic nature. I miss all of the things that he pushed me. He pushed me over the edge. Sam was the guy who would push you over the edge of the abyss, and 9 times out of 10, jump in after you. Sometimes he wouldn't.